So these people here behind me, these are the absolute top of the world. These are the global heads of the largest pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies of the world. These people and their companies have saved, I think, millions of lives over the last couple of decades. And if you look, what's going to come up next, you're going to be amazed. We're talking about drugs that can boost your own immune system to target cancer. We're talking about gene editing therapies that can reverse blindness and many, many, many other treatments. But these folks, they're sitting in a US Senate hearing beginning of this year, and they were not being asked about all the great stuff they're doing and how many lives they're saved. Nope. They were asked about the prices of drugs. And Mike, there it is. And I understand why that is. And I think not only me, many politicians understand that. Because if we look at the future drugs that are coming to market, we're talking about these kind of money, $4 to $5 million per treatment per patient. And everybody's wondering, is this affordable, right? Can we even afford this with our healthcare insurance, et cetera? And some people are a bit relaxed, and they're like, oh, don't worry about it, it'll be okay, we just fix it. But as we speak now, the UK, which is a very rich company, is already denying access to treatment to quite a few patients only because of the price tag. And I'm pretty sure that we all realize that when a rich country cannot afford this even, then we're really into trouble. And what you see happening now is all these people are blaming each other. You also saw that in the US Senate hearing. Big Pharma is to blame. Now, what I would like to do for the next 15 minutes is guide you a little bit through how we develop drugs and why it's not working as it is. Because we developed a system for developing and testing drugs that was about in the 1960s when we made that, and that system is really not geared to progress of science and technology to integrate that in the world. And that's what I'll try to show you. So, if you want to get a drug to market, let's say in 2023, then most likely you have to start developing it in 2010, 13 years earlier. In the next 4 phases, or 4 years, it's called the preclinical phase. Here we test molecules, develop molecules, maybe look at the mode of action, etc. The next 4 years becomes interesting. That's when we first put it into patients. There's 2 phases, takes about 4 years, and in these phases, we just look at, is it safe? What does it do with the toxicity? And do we think it's going to have any therapeutic effect? When that's all okay, we come to the 3rd phase, and that's when we do big trials. And when they're okay, and we call them randomized controlled trials, we give a group a drug, and then we test it with a group with the placebo, and we see if it works. If that's then okay, we ask for approval, reimbursement, and then it comes to market. Now, who does this? Very quickly, academia, scientists do the first part. Then we have the smaller companies, the smaller biotech and pharma companies, they do the phase 1 and 2. And then the big players take it over and it comes on the market. And the important thing to realize here is the molecule does not change once it comes into the body of a person. We call it drug development, but actually it's drug testing, because all they do is test the drug on patients and see which patient actually works with the drug. Now, there are a few problems here. The first one has everything to do with the fact that these large players dominate the end of this process, and I'll get into that. The second problem is we think that this whole testing thing works really well, but really there are some lacks there. And the last thing is there are a lot of people that want a drug now in 2019 because they have no other options, but the drug is still in trial, so they can't access that. Now, let me just go through this with you together. So the first thing is, what is the problem there with these large players? It looks very complicated, but it's not that bad. 2 things are important. The whole thing costs about $2.5 billion. And there are 2 things you must remember. One of them is that 53% cost of capital, which says more than half of all this money is just spent on borrowing the money to do things in the first place. So this is all financial stuff, nothing really concrete. And the second thing is that after phase 2, when we know that it's safe, we don't know how good it works, but we know it's safe, it costs just as much as all the things before, all the phases before. That's why these smaller companies, they cannot afford that last phase, and the big boys take over. Is it true that the big boys don't do anything themselves? Actually, it's true. If you look at the largest pharma companies, from their own R&D efforts, they probably put less than 30% on the market. So they really buy everything from the smaller players. There's nothing illegal about this, right? It's okay. This is free market, it's shareholder value. I'm not blaming these big boys. But in the end, this is what we then have as a result. So that's really an issue. Now, the second thing that I wanted to talk about has everything to do with this phase. Now, we assume that when we put a drug on the market, it went through all the testing procedures, that it works. But I'm telling you, this is not the case at all. Because the people that go into trial, they have all these inclusion criteria. You have to be a male between 20 and 40 years old, blah, blah, blah. And then we say, oh, this works. It comes to the market, and then suddenly, it doesn't work at all. And I didn't make this up. I mean, from 2009 to 2013, the European Medicines Agency, they approved 68 indications for cancer, and only half of these actually gave any benefit to quality of life and survival. But they're all on the market, and we all think, oh, they work. And the boss of the EMA, a guy called Guido Razi, was even co-author of another article, and he says, the shortcomings of these randomized controlled clinical trials, which they use in phase 3, is just absolutely insufficient. We need more data to determine if it even works. So, also, the whole testing part really has some lacks here. Now, this third thing. Just imagine that you have an unmet medical need now, right? You have some cancer. You hear of something that's now in development that looks really good, that could work for you. Yeah, of course, you want to access it then, right? It's your last chance. A lot of people want this. And you can't wait another 4 years because then you're gone. But a lot of these requests do not just end up in a patient getting it what they need. And don't believe me, it's really a big issue. We saw it in the New York Times, all these breakthroughs, all this information, and all these consumers that know more, they want this stuff, but they can't get it. And the funny thing is, if you would want a drug, you could get it if you get into a clinical trial. But 95% of the people cannot get into a trial. Either you're too old or whatever, or it's just in a different country. The trial might be in the US and you live in Italy, right? You can't access it. And we know that 70% of people are really willing to try it, are willing to actually have this drug in development. So this is really an issue. Now, if you look at these three things and you start to combine them, something interesting happens. The first thing is the whole large biotech thing, right? A bit of a problem. They buy them up, high prices. The second thing has everything to do with this whole data part. It doesn't really work. We don't have enough data. The third thing is all these patients that want access to a drug in development but don't get it. Now, what if we just give these patients their treatment? So we actually treat patients. Because, if a doctor says it makes sense you get this drug in the development, the patient says, I want it, then you have to ask the regulator, may I please access this? And if the regulator says, yes, it makes sense, then you're allowed to get it. But being allowed to get it doesn't mean that you get it, because who's going to pay for it, right? And there are very few insurers and very few countries that would pay for these drugs in development. And to me, personally, that makes no sense. This is treatment, right? You have no options, you're going to die. The doctor says get it, the government says it's okay, then it should be reimbursed. And this is the funny part. If you would actually reimburse this, a lot of things are going to change in this whole model. Because if you would reimburse it, and you say in return, I want data of this patient. So I want to see what this patient does outside of the clinical trial setting, exactly the data that we were missing. That's the first thing. But the second thing is you're going to give a new pathway to these smaller and biotech firms to get directly to the patients. And this changes the whole dynamics of this financial model, because now suddenly these smaller players can have a way of recuperating their costs in the first two phases. And this has everything to do with finance, but the cost of capital, that large chunk of more than 50%, goes very fast down if you give them earlier access. Now, you would wonder, okay, cool, then why are we not doing this? Is this not possible? Well, you know, in all honesty, it is possible, because what we should do is just follow the current early access regulation. This is already everywhere in place. Most countries have this, in the Netherlands as well. If you get the approval from the government, you can get it. Then can we already track the data? Yes, there are enough current technologies that can capture the data that we need. So then leaves you with the last part, then reimburse these drugs in development. And here is where it goes wrong, because this is not happening. And you wonder then, why is this not happening? People are complaining about the process and the systems and the high prices, but they are not willing to do this. And you wonder then, why are they not trying to do this? And what is it then? And it's mostly all related to fear. It's the fear of the unknown. But from our point of view, the fear of not being able to pay for a drug in the future at all is a much huger fear than not trying out new models. And there's a real opportunity here, especially for those countries that have a national or universal healthcare system, right? They have their own people in their country insured. If they would start doing this, even in small pilots to start, they could be so successful because they have a large population, so you would have enough statistical data to see, does this make sense? And on the other side, they also have enough cash, right? So they could really give incentives to these small biotech companies to deliver these drugs. And you can make agreements on the data, and you can make agreements on the price. And then the whole thing would start to change. And the good news is that there are now a few pilots going on in the world here and there that are trying this out. France does it a little bit, and we need a lot more pilots. We need a lot more examples that try to do this stuff, because otherwise I can almost guarantee you that the prices will never go down. It's all based on finance and on the way that we now develop and test drugs. So, if you think this makes sense, can I do anything about it? Well, the thing that you could do, if you really think this makes sense, is you have two roles as a human being, right? You can be a citizen, which means you actually can vote. And if you really think this is important, then vote for those politicians who don't blame the whole time, because it's so easy to blame Big Pharma, but nothing changes with blaming. Vote for those politicians that actually really want to do something about it, because there are a few out there that are really thinking about this. And the second part that you could do, you're not only a citizen, you're also a consumer. And consumers, obviously, you pay for your money of your insurance companies. And if you want, just ask your insurance company and check that once you get to this point, and a lot of people get to this point, that you need this drug in development, ask them if they would actually take care of you and reimburse that drug for you, because otherwise it's never going to change the whole system. And if we would try that out a little bit together, then maybe we can make the drugs affordable again. Thank you very much.